You've spent a ton of money and time developing your company brand, right? Then you find out the social media channels that you're using to communicate that brand aren't built for companies, they're built for you. So the question is, how much time have you put into developing your own personal brand? How are you using those channels to your benefit? It's a huge subject because it can unlock a lot of doors for you. And so that's the reason it's the subject of today's Leaders List. I'm Bryon Morrison, CEO and co-founder of Proxxy, and we're going to speak today with Fanny Dunagan, who's an expert on developing your own personal brand and developing a community. Let's jump right into it. Welcome to the Leaders List. All right, Fanny Dunagan, I am so excited to have a pro like you on the Leaders List. Thank you for joining us.
When you say I'm a pro, then I'm really flattered.
No, this is awesome. You know, we're going to talk a little bit today about personal brands. And one of the things that, when we start talking to executives and they start thinking about, like, how am I going to do communications for my company? What role do I have to play, or should I play? And I think it's so interesting to me how you have advised executives through this process. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this and then what PathLynks does.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Bryon, for having me on. Always a pleasure to speak with you. I kind of got into this by accident. I started off as a geeky civil engineer, and then when that got tiring and I wanted to talk to more people, I got into business consulting and started at Arthur Andersen, doing software implementations, change management for aerospace and defense companies. Did that for almost a decade and ended up, burning out actually and wanting to have babies. And so I was a stay-at-home mom for a while, and I did that for a while. And that's when I felt a little lost, actually. And that's when I ended up volunteering and getting into our local communities and helping them build training programs and job fairs. And it was through that I ended up falling in love with video marketing and branding on LinkedIn. And then eventually through these job fairs, employers started hiring me and our company PathLynks, and then job seekers wanted to build their brand. And so everything kind of happened very, very organically. But I always kind of see this as like the third phase of my life, from corporate to mom to entrepreneur.
I love it. And it makes so much sense looking at this from when you were starting to get into it from a staffing perspective, because if we're recruiting and staffing, it's all about the individual. And then that's just kind of naturally the timeline just hit also perfectly around influencer marketing and individuals' personal brands. And so, you came up at the perfect time to be a pro in this space.
And I mean, these days, PathLynks, we help tech consulting firms, especially with their LinkedIn brands, videos, and live streams. But LinkedIn did start off as a job search network, right? But now ever since COVID, I think, it's evolved beyond just job search to a place for people to learn, to grow their network, and to build their authority. And so now there are more people going on to LinkedIn purely to look at content than just to look for jobs. And so it's become this like huge resource to build networks and learn.
I agree. I mean, frankly, I find it to be the most valuable social network, because it's the people's perspective on it is different. It's professional. Yes. And I kind of like how the community fights back too. Like when somebody starts putting stuff out there, it's like, hey, that doesn't belong here. And I love that.
And especially because LinkedIn for your audience, right? I know you have a lot of founders of small and medium-sized organizations, right? Yeah. LinkedIn is the most affluent platform out there, right? This is the place where you're going to find other executives, find other founders, And you're going to know exactly what their job title is, as well as their company and what industry they're in. And so there's no other platform where you could get that instantly.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it's a functional tool that you should be using. But now let's talk a little bit more about the content around it. So,
Sure.
you know, it's funny because some individuals that we work with, it ranges from, I really want to do this. Like,
Yeah.
I want to have a presence. And then there's other, you know, the other side of the spectrum, which is like, God, do I have to do this? And, you know, so how do you answer that? Like, do I have to be the next big thing? Right? Is that the goal?
Yeah. It's, do I have to? And then I also hear, I don't do social media. That's
Right.
I hear that objection as well. Nobody has to do anything. The better question is, do you want to grow at scale? Right? Yes, you can continue to grow your business through referrals or networking events or the traditional methods. However, if you want to grow at scale and gather a following and a community of thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and do it quickly, LinkedIn is the place for that. And a lot of times people think social media is about, I need to be an influencer and I need to be known, when actually LinkedIn itself, it's more about how can you educate people? How can you share what you've learned? I heard a great quote recently that we're most qualified to help people that we used to be.
Oh,
So just sit with that, right? We are most qualified to help people we used to be, right? And it is our duty and our gift to give back to people what we've learned. So if we come from that space of we're here to give and educate and share our knowledge versus, oh, I want to be popular and I want to be an influencer and I want to be famous. If we come from that space of giving and serving, that's when you build a very loyal community. And once you have that loyal community, once you have that attention, right? Attention is the new currency, okay? Once you have that attention and the loyalty, then whatever you say and advocate for, whether it's your own business or a product you're pushing or a service you're promoting, then you've already built that trust. And we buy from people we know, like, and trust.
yeah, that's fantastic. The interest in making an impact with others is such a good foundation, right? I mean, starting from a place of giving back, as opposed to
100%.
kind of like those people who say, well, I just want to be famous. Really? Why do you want to be famous? But the
And people
idea
see right
of,
through that.
they
People
do,
will
right,
always see right through that.
right. So the idea of collecting a following that you can keep giving to, and then the community starts to give back to. I think that's one of the best things about it is, you know, when you start to develop your own personal brand, you find your position where you belong and where you should speak. And then that allows room for other people also. And so it's a cool way to start to build that community around a philosophy of giving
100%.
back.
And I'll share a stat with you and your audience, Bryon, and that is, especially if your audience and your founders are in B2B, right?
Yeah.
95% of B2B customers are not ready to buy. Only 5% are ready to buy immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So those 95% of people that are not ready to buy the software or the service or whatever it is you're doing, our job is to nurture that and build the community around that so that we stay top of mind. And when we're top of mind, when they finally hit that pain point or they have that problem, they will think of your company first because you were top of mind, because you kept on dripping posts into their feed. Can I give an example of that, Bryon?
Please. Yeah.
So I got connected to a wonderful woman, a real estate agent of all people, right? And when I met her, I had no desire to sell my house. In fact, that was going to be my forever home. And so we just connected purely based on friendliness and respecting each other's work, right? But she was always posting stuff about the latest real estate news and how she was changing the industry and all that, right? And so she was always top of mind. And then lo and behold, when COVID hit and we needed a different configuration in our house, and both my husband needed offices, right? I thought of her first. And then she got my business. There's tons of other real estate agents out there, but she was top of mind. And because she built trust with me, basically every week I see a little post of hers. And I never needed to buy, but by the time I had that problem, she was the top real estate agent in my mind. And that applies to everyone and all services.
It does. And what you're doing is you're creating there's degrees of engagement, right? Now, we always think about degrees of engagement in digital. Like I have impressions, I get engagements, I keep moving down the funnel. But there are degrees of relationship. So if I see it every once in a while, that's one part of it. The second level is when I actually connect with somebody like you're talking about, and then you start to understand each other, and then you ask questions of each other, and there's an exchange of knowledge, and you keep moving through a funnel of relationship.
Yes.
And so that's a great point. It's a perfect example.
And it usually takes about 11 pieces of content before somebody takes an action on something, right? We live in a very busy digital world. Our feed is just constant, right? But if we see something 11 times, then, if we're at a point where we want to do something, even just to connect with someone, or just to send them a message, that's when we'll take that action. So it takes time.
Interesting.
It takes patience.
Well, it does take time and patience, and that's really hard for some people to understand. So let's just talk about how would you get started? If I came to you and I said, okay, look, I get it. I know the benefit to my customers. I know the benefit to my staff, which is also something that's forgotten, is that if you are communicating consistently, your staff sees that and they understand your vision and your desires and what you want to try and achieve as an organization.
Right.
So let's say I've got all that down, and then I go, Fanny, how do I get started?
Well, number one, you got to define your unique brand, right? Yep. And a lot of times we think as long as we post on the company page, that's good enough. And I'm talking to all the founders in your audience there. But we buy from people. We don't buy from logos, okay? Unless you're Prada or Louis Vuitton, okay? But in the small and medium-sized company world, we buy from people, right? And so all the founders out there, the leaders, the sales professionals that are in your audience, creating a great personal brand is your core foundation. And it's made up of 4 components. This is what I've found to be effective across all platforms. Number 1 is, what is your expertise, right? What are the 3 topics that you want to be known for? And it can, obviously, a lot more than 3 things, but pick 3 to start with, right? So you could be a project manager. And so your topics is project management, resource planning, and a software, let's say, right? And so define 3 topics that you are an expert in and that you can create content around. So that's number 1, your expertise. Secondly, it's your values. If you were to sit down and list out 3 of your values, what would that be? Is it creativity? Is it responsibility? Is it leadership? Is it competition? Whatever that is, right? Because the expertise tells people what you do. The values tell people who you are and what you stand for. Okay? And then thirdly, ask yourself, I like to use the Clifton Strengths Finder. It's a great tool. It's like $20. You get your top 5 strengths. And in there, you'll get a report that tells you exactly where your strengths are And this is like, you're good at it even if you're grumpy and tired that day. Those are the skills that are like innately in you, right?
Yeah.
And then fourthly is your interests and hobbies, right? This is what will make you interesting. Are you an avid golfer? Are you a tennis player? Do you like to knit? Do you listen to podcasts? Are you a book reader? You like to go to the opera or whatever it is, right? You like hip hop. And so with those 4 components, you can create endless content. What you know with your expertise, what your values are, your strengths, and then your interests. And the way that gets distributed across your content is approximately 55% of the time, you should be talking about your expertise. And then 15% around your values and stories, 15% around your strengths, and then 15% around your interests and hobbies. And that way you become this 3-dimensional, deep, well-rounded person to your audience. So that's where I usually start, is I would sit down with the client and then we work on defining those 4 things. And then that becomes the core of what they'll talk about, whether it's a video or blog or their website, all that stuff.
Right, that just becomes the tactics and the channels that you add on to that, but the core is consistent.
Exactly.
Fanny, is that how you balance? So once you get into this and you start doing it, the first argument is always like, what am I going to talk about? Well, that was perfect. Like, that was a great way of outlining that. And I've developed brands with big companies for years, but it's so much more fun and interesting to do it around individuals.
Yeah.
And then identify how those ladder up, to companies. And how they can work together, because it is, a big brand is a collection of humans.
Yeah.
And so you have to figure out how they work together.
Yes.
So the first problem is always like, what am I going to talk about? And then the second thing you start to see is you want to keep tweaking it, you want to keep improving it, you want to keep innovating. But the number one rule of brand is to be consistent. And have consistent messaging also.
Yeah.
How do you balance that? How do you balance that with your clientele? Because I know you're moving them beyond the obvious, and you're getting them into more advanced work. How do you keep that innovation and freshness going?
First of all, I tell them consistency trumps frequency. Okay. So I tell them I rather they commit to saying, I will always post on Tuesday mornings at 8 a.m. every single week. I rather they do that and stick to it than one week they're posting 5 days a week, and then another week they're quiet, and then another week, one off here, one off there, right? Think of it as like you and I grew up with TV when we didn't have Netflix, right, Bryon? Right. And so I always grew up knowing on Thursday nights, those are all the funny sitcoms, right? With Seinfeld and I forgot whatever else, but
NBC owned it.
Oh, Friends, right? Friends and Seinfeld every Thursday night, right? And so same thing. Think of your content as that. Every Tuesday morning, you're going to post something around your expertise, values, strengths, and interests, right? And that way you can keep up with it, right? So that's kind of like layer 1. Pick something that you're comfortable and you can stick with it. Now, if you have a team that supports you, then you can start to define things. You can say, every Tuesday, I talk about my expertise. Every Thursday, I tell a story. And then maybe every Friday, we do something fun, like #FunFridays, right? So you could do that and increase your frequency with a team. But as a founder or leader, I think at the very, very least, commit to Tuesdays in the mornings, because that's also a really great time for people to see posts. A lot of surveys have said Tuesdays and Wednesday mornings are a great time to post kind of like your pivotal pillar kind of content, the content around your expertise. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love the point about consistency, though, because that is how you start to develop a community or a core follower group, because they start to expect it. And a lot of, it's when you're getting started, like there's this amazing moment between you think like, okay, well, I'm doing that, and I did it 3 times, 3 weeks. I did Tuesday at 8, like I was supposed to.
Yeah.
How long does it take before you start to feel that effect of like there are real followers? How do you get over that hump?
Yeah. I think minimum 3 months, and then within probably a year, that's when you really have that network, right? So minimum 3 months, because you're just getting your feet wet, you're trying out different things, you're not quite sure what resonates with your audience versus what doesn't. And if I may, I do want to kind of stress there's also 4 purposes of content, which ties directly to those 4 ways to define your brand. And that is, number 1, you educate people with your expertise, right? You give them 3 ways to improve whatever, 5 best practices to do this, 7 mistakes to avoid when doing this, and so forth, right? So number 1, you educate your audience. Number 2, you inform your audience. So like if you're going to a webinar or you're hosting a webinar, you're going to be at a conference, right? You're informing them of a date, a time, and then the topics, right? So that's number 2. Number 3 is you inspire them. And this is where you're talking to people's hearts, right? Education and information, you're talking to people's heads. Number 3, inspiring is when you share a story, right? So one of my really popular post recently is I talked about my struggles of trying to juggle consulting and motherhood, and how I decided that wasn't for me. And I decided to be a stay-at-home mom for a while, right? And so that doesn't necessarily showcase my expertise or anything, but it creates a connection with the audience, right? And so that's building trust, right? And so any kind of inspirational stories really resonates with people. And then fourthly is you entertain them, right? That's where you can weave in your hobbies, right? We could be talking about, well, I remember a show that you and I did, Bryon. We were talking about chief of staffs, right? And we got into it about the West Wing, right? So we tied the concept of the chief of staff to a TV series, right? So you're using an entertaining way to talk about something around your expertise, right? And we totally geeked out over that on our show.
We did. I still remember because we had just done a piece on everybody needs a Leo, because of the chief of staff. It was so good.
Yes. So that's you talk to people's heads with the expertise, right? In your case, it was the benefits of having a chief of staff, right? But then you entertain them by telling it in a unique way. And we did it through the West Wing analogy. Right? So that's how you can kind of like customize what you might say and then put it into those 4 buckets.
That's perfect. How do you, there's a point in this where people go, yeah, but like I got to do business, right?
Yep.
And so how do you monetize this, or how do you, when does the commercial aspect overtake the entertainment aspect?
Yeah. I have a great ratio that I learned from somebody, and I love it. It's the 5-to-1 give to ask ratio.
Oh, that's great.
So for every 5 pieces of content where you're just giving and the only call to action is let's connect and follow for more insights on whatever, project management or branding, whatever your topic is, right? For every 5 of those kind of posts, your 6th one can be, hey, by the way, thank you for following my posts. Just want to let you know that I am the CEO of whatever company. We help companies with X, Y, and Z. If you ever need a services around that, please feel free to reach out. We offer these packages, right? But because you gave so much, people don't mind when you ask, right? because then you've built that trust. If I'm following somebody for 6 months and then they make an offer to buy something or have a template that I can download or whatever, I'm more inclined to do that because I know they gave me value for that, leading up to that, right? So that's one way, the 5-to-1 give to ask ratio, right? So not every post has to just be giving. The 6-1 can be in asking.
That's kind of like that. Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's kind of like that Gary Vaynerchuk book. What is it? Jab, 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 right hook.
Yes, very similar.
Same idea, right?
Same idea.
But I love the 5-to-1, and I don't care if it's 5-to-1 or 3-to-1. But the bottom line is you are over indexing on helping, and in that process, I think there's also an interesting opportunity to kind of weave in what you do into those stories that you're talking about,
100%.
because you have such great insights, right? I mean,
100%.
Fanny, you work with people all the time where you go, let me tell you a story about what somebody was going through. And that's, certainly that's promoting your business and who you work with, but it's really, it's elevating that and communicating that to everybody else who's probably also feeling that same pain.
100%. And then you can take it a step further. After you create a post, right? You look at who liked it and who commented on it, right? And a lot of times the likes are obviously a lot of your first connections, right? People that you're already connected to, and they may or may not be prospects, but there's also second degree of connections and third degree, right? And those, you can look at those second degree of connections and ask yourself, is that a prospect, right? And you follow up by sending them a message and saying, thank you, John, for liking my post on LinkedIn branding. Is this a topic that you are exploring or looking to build for yourself? And then that's it, right?
Yeah.
And so they're already a little tiny bit warm because they liked your content. Right? So you almost have a little bit more of a permission to send them that message versus all these like spam messages we get, right, Bryon? They're so cold, right? But because they liked it or commented on your post, because you're talking about your expertise, it's very fair to just then say, hey, thank you for your lovely comment on my post about branding. Is that a topic that you're looking to explore, or you're just creating this tiny little bit of an opening? And then that way it's inbound leads, right? It's not cold outreach, and you're establishing a relationship. And then those people that reach out to connect with you, I always send a message and say, thank you for reaching out to connect. I'm always curious with new connections. Can you tell me what topic drew you to my profile?
Yeah.
Very open-ended question, but then that's the start of a conversation. Right?
It's funny how many people, they get so frustrated, with people reaching out to them on LinkedIn. And frankly, I don't accept every invite. I think that's a lion, right? LinkedIn Open Network or something like that. I'm not a lion. But when people reach out to me, I have a standard response, right? Which is, thank you. I appreciate you reaching out. What would you like to connect about? How do you, what can we do for each other?
Yeah.
And usually I always follow that up with a phone call, because I'm like, look, I just want to know who I'm connected to and know that we can help each other. But as soon as you start getting frustrated with it, it's like, well, you just have this amazing tool in front of you. Why wouldn't you just make connections with humans that could potentially matter?
But they technically gave you a little bit of permission, right?
That's right.
Because they reached out to connect, or they liked one of your posts, or they commented, right?
Right.
And so with those three things alone, you're taking it from content to a message. And then once you get a little warm through a few messages, then you can take it to a phone call. And then that's when you can go deep, right?
Right.
And
Those are those
so,
degrees of relationship I was talking about.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
And so the content gives you the opener. It cracks the door a little open so that you can start that relationship. And how great is that versus, okay, I'm going to cold outreach and like dial, or I'm going to send these random messages that nobody reads and everybody's just deleting. Right?
Yeah.
You're leading with your content. You're leading with who you are and what you know.
Yeah. Okay. So what are the biggest mistakes you see all the time?
Making the content about themselves.
Yeah.
Right. You know, example, it's all about them, right?
Yeah. Me,
It's
me, me,
not
right?
me. Like, I just came back from an event. I met all these people. Look at me, right? Okay, let's use that example. Okay, a lot of people make that mistakes. They post photos from an event, and then I attended this. I met all these people. Period. That's it. Right? So an alternative to that is, what if you went to an event? And I'm a big note taker. Okay, I'm I'm like a geeky student, right? I always take notes at every event that I go to, especially if there's a speaker, right? So I might come home with 3 big takeaways, 3 bullet points of something I learned.
Yeah.
So then I'm still posting the photos of the event and of people that I met, but I say in my header, 5 things that I learned from this organization and this speaker. And then bullet 1, bullet 2, bullet 3. So I'm sharing something I learned, right? It also shows that I'm continually growing, right? And then I'm sharing it with my network. And then I can like tag people. And when I tag people, it's not so much, oh, I hope they all come and like it. It's more like, hey, everyone, make sure you connect with this person, Bryon Morrison, that I met at the networking event. He's the co-founder of Proxxy. I learned so much about chief of staff services from him. If you're looking for one, be sure to connect with him. So I made the post about what I learned and about the people I met and gave them kudos. Yeah. And so suddenly you're making about others versus yourself. So that's an example.
Yeah. Okay. That's perfect. That's easy, right? Just a little bit of gratitude and a little bit of awareness of what did you get from it. Yeah. What are some other? I'll tell you one thing I see all the time that drives me crazy is just the repost with no context, nothing else with it. Why does that matter to you?
Yes.
You know, like it takes 2 seconds to say, I'm sharing this so that other people can see it. Maybe that's it. There's a job opening and I know this individual and they're worth it for you to look at. Okay. That matters so much as opposed to just reposting all the time. That's my pet peeve I'll throw out.
Agree. Yes. And it actually does nothing for your brand to just repost other people's things. You can start there if you're shy to post or hesitant to post and you just want to like work that muscle of doing something. So yes, you can kind of call it a ladder. You can start by liking something. Then the next rung is you start by commenting on things. Then the next rung is you're reposting something, okay? But if you've been doing that, then you need to graduate to the 4th rung, okay? Which is then you can share something, but it might be like 5 tips to improve something, but then you add 2 more, right? And you can say, hey, just want to share these 5 tips on leadership from Forbes that I read recently. I would also add this tip as well as this tip. And then so you add your perspective, right?
Yeah.
And then the 5th rung is then you start to create your own posts, right? And you can say these are the 5 things of leadership that I want to share and that I've learned over my 2 decades as a management consultant, right? You see how you can sneak in a little little plug, right? And then, but then you end with, what else would you add? Right? That's a common thing that's a common mistake. People post and then they don't ask of their audience. So a tip here for your audience, Bryon, is post something and then end with a question, right? What else would you add to this list? What else do you think? Comment below.
You know what I love about that, Fanny, is the tactic of saying, if it's a list, what else would you add to this list? That's very definitive and simple for somebody to look at and understand how to comment on it. I make this mistake oftentimes where I'm like, what do you think? It's too open-ended,
Too broad.
and I do have a really good community of people who they're smart, and so they add to that, and it's great. But I often catch myself going, I should have been more descriptive of how they can get engaged, and that lets people who aren't as comfortable do that as well.
Yeah. And another, and you can alternate. You can ask for longer answers one day, and then another week you can say, of my 5 tips, which one resonated with you the most? And then people can say, oh, number 3, number 4, number 5, and then so forth. Right. So it's still
that's one of your best strengths, Fanny. Is I think that's so natural to you because you really are interested and curious, and so you do a great job of drawing people into that. But you don't have to be like that. Doesn't have to be one of your 5 strengths on Clifton, your Strength Finders, right? I mean, you can build that muscle of curiosity.
Yes. And if nothing else, just think of these things as frameworks, right? They're just the 5 things to remember when I'm posting, right? A headline, a body, a call to action, and then maybe like a question, right? To engage your audience. Okay? So if you're not, I'm a relator, right? To your point, I'm a relator and includer for my Clifton strengths. That's why I'm always like, I want to include people. I want to ask them what they think, right?
Yeah.
But if you're not like that, that's fine. Just remember that those are the ingredients of a good post. Right?
Yeah. That's awesome, Fanny. Yeah. I mean, understanding those formulas is the basics. And then after you've done that for a while, you'll find your own place and you'll create your own, custom elements that really make you who you are. And that's the beauty of a personal brand, right? You're the one who gets to define that.
And the ultimate benefit for your audience, Bryon, I think is for all the founders out there, right? When you create content, you're going from trying to go out and reach out to people, which is such tremendous effort, right? Versus you're putting out content and then people come to you naturally, right? They're warm. You're attracting them with what you know and who you are. Who doesn't love warm leads?
It's an easier conversation. There's no question.
Yeah.
Well, Fanny, oh, no, go ahead.
No, a lot of times, you create that consistent content, and there's going to be people that will reach out to you and say, Bryon, I've been following you for 6 months. And you'll be like, what? You've never liked or commented on anything. Right. But think how warm I am by the time I say that to you. Do you mind if I hop on a call with you to learn more about your services? Yeah,
those voyeurs are out there. And they're, when they get to a point, I think you said it perfectly. They may not need what you have at that moment, but they're interested, they're paying attention, they're learning from you. And so when they do come to that moment, at least you're going to have the conversation.
100%.
Yeah. Fanny, this has been so awesome. I always love your perspective. And I think the folks that get to work with you are really, really lucky because they can start to understand it's more than just whether or not I have a following and I'm getting something up on the internet that people can believe in from a thought leadership perspective. I think a ton of what people get from you is defining their brand. And, that's not something that we all do every day where we sit around and think about those 4 items that you talked about and how do I weave that together in a story that matters, that I care about, and that really illustrates who I am. So I think that's such a great offering. I think anybody who has the opportunity to work with you would benefit greatly from that. And we all appreciate your wisdom.
Thank you, Bryon. Thank you. I love it. I love what I do. I'm here to shine a light so that others can shine their light.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you, Fanny.
Take care, Bryon.